My name is Dwayne Winter. I am the Community Liaison Coordinator for Nova Scotia Brotherhood. These community Zooms are brought to you by the Men's Health League. We represent the community, and the Men's Health League, we gather men together to talk about social determinants of health in every aspect. So during this whole COVID thing, we figured to bring forth this community talks through Zoom. That way everyone can kind of sit back, relax, enjoy it from their benefits of their home, and have an open conversation and take it from there. So tonight, also the Men's Health League has joined with Nova Scotia Black Women's Alliance, who will be presenting tonight. And I'll introduce their facilitator, which will be Wendy.
I'm good evening. I'll be doing the bio, and I believe Karen and Marshall will be doing the facilitating tonight. So good evening, thank you for coming. My name is Wendy Lee Wilson, and I'm with the Nova Scotia Black Women's Alliance. We're a small group of women that consists of Karen Hudson, Marcia Hudson-Ash, Dr. Barb Hamilton-Hinch, Denise Riley, and myself. So we are a platform interested in collaborating with other groups and individuals to deliver speaking engagements and conferences with a focus on Black health education. So we're looking to build a database of presenters and participants for speaking engagements such as conferences, summits, symposiums, platforms like this. So if you're interested in either being a presenter or being a participant, you can get in our database and we can let you know when we have these speaking engagements going on and send you out the Zoom information. You can send your email to Nova Scotia Black Women's Alliance at gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat. And without any further ado, I will be reading the bio for our speaker tonight. So our speaker this evening is Dr. Marlene Ruck Simmonds, and she is from the Caribbean community in Whitney Pier, Nova Scotia. She is the daughter of the late Hazel, Rowett, and Winston Ruck. She attributes her understanding of educational leadership to her parental, familial, and communal heritage, and she embraces a Christ-centered, Afrocentric approach to leadership as a seminal in the quest for racial equity and justice within Nova Scotia's educational system. Marlene welcomes the opportunity to lead alongside others who are intentional in their efforts to ensure that Nova Scotia's educational system becomes an equitable, culturally responsive, and safe learning environment for all children and youth. Achieving this goal is particularly significant for learners who self-identify as Black or African or of African ancestry. Consequently, Marlene regards the well-being and educational success of Black African Nova Scotians as foundational tenets of her mandate and decision-making. Marlene is dedicated to building supportive and inspiring educational spaces for imagining and enacting the promise of education. Marlene acknowledges the wisdom and accomplishments that predate her appointment and rests within the convictions of her spirituality that all things are possible. I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
And so before Marlene speaks, we're going to have a dialogue here where she'll present, but I just want to recognize that and give condolence to her. She just came from a funeral today, so we appreciate her actually taking time out of from her family to be with us this evening. We're going to try to keep the conversation to 7:30, 6 to 7:30. And we also want to acknowledge that we're on Mi'kmaq land as well. But we also want to recognize our ancestors, our African ancestors who paved the way for us. And if it wasn't for them, we would not be who we are today. So on that note, we want to call Marlene Ruck Simmonds, and she will give you her title and her position at the African Canadian Service branch, or the EECD. Dr. Marlene Ruck Simmonds.
She doesn't have her speaker on.
Simmonds, you are on mute.
Oh. Okay, that's probably better. Okay, so I'll go really quickly. I was saying I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm here because of the place that was created for me through family, through stories, through narratives, and very grateful. Having worked in education, I better look at the camera since people are been involved in education for a long time, like all of you, and truly believe that better is possible. And so what I'd like to talk about and have a discussion tonight around the state of education, especially as it relates to Black women, is our role and what are the things that we are thinking about, and what are the things that we have been asked to think about, not through ourselves, but through those who have come before us. And so currently, as you know, I'm working with the Department of Education. I work as the executive director, and I have this dual positioning tonight that I want to sort of lay clear and put forward, because I believe in working with integrity and be able to share and to discuss and to allow people to know where I stand, and that includes where I'm presently working within the Department of Education as well as within community. So for my talk tonight, I guess what I'm really interested in and have been interested is the link between spirituality, educational change, and community, because I believe that those collaborative links have been necessary for me to undertake the work that I've needed to do. And for the people that came before me, I've learned through their lives that those links are essential for the changes that we are creating. So I ground my work, as you heard, in a very Christ-centered perspective. I don't apologize for that. I boldly declare that. That has what has strengthened me, empowered me, equipped me, held me, picked me up when there were times when I didn't believe I would be able to go forward. So I stand in that place. And as you heard, I'm going to be looking a little bit at my notes as well. As you heard, I'm of Bayesian or West Indian heritage, but also African Nova Scotian. I remember people who came before me, and the women in particular, and how they poured into me love and kindness, storied and lived accounts of faith and hope and the impossible. And I can't underscore how essential their lives have been in terms of influencing the work that I have been doing. And in my current role in the work that I'm doing, I see that as being important to passing down and being able to share those stories that I know have not only strengthened me and empowered me. And in our community, sometimes we don't pay attention to those stories until we're much older, until we age a little bit, and we realize, or at least I realized, the wisdom that was being passed down to me through my mothers, through the people who mothered me. And I find myself more and more relying on those stories, relying on those parables, relying on those sayings.
I need a little bit of butter or margarine. Okay.
Yeah, I hear somebody saying they need a little bit of butter. So I guess, the women who have poured into our lives have either been sometimes related to us by blood, but we know within our community, blood doesn't define family.
Take this, right?
And it's really through love. So thinking about the women who have loved you and the women who have poured into your life, and holding on to all of those things that have made you who you are and strengthened you, even to be able to host this forum for important discussions to be held. So you have been strengthened by people who have come before you, and I am no different. I guess what I want to say is that education has always been in a state. Our family knew this to be true. Our communities knew this to be true. I remember as a young girl sitting in my home, and there'd be leaders in the communities, my parents and families, and they would just gather very informally to talk about the state of education. I remember that well. And as a little girl, just being off on the side listening, not truly understanding, but knew that there was important work that was happening there in community. And so those meetings, I believe, are ongoing, and we certainly saw as a result of the COVID in particular, the ways in which communities gathered and came together to create those changes. From a professional standpoint, I think it's those gatherings that are so important. One of the lessons my mom always told me was about creating places for others and not just yourself. So that collaborative work is essential to really shaping and changing the shape of education, that placemaking, so that other people who know and know differently and know more than you have an opportunity to share and to be able to create those platforms for them. So let me get started. That was a little bit of a preamble as I'm thinking about the importance of the important work that you're doing as Black women and the Men's Health Group. And let me also say thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. So from the standpoint of Black women, I guess I want to reiterate that Black women have always been involved in leading the education of our children, beginning with the wisdom, the values, and the stories and the parables and sayings that have been passed down through the generations. Black women have nurtured our children to persevere and to see their brilliance, even when told it did not even exist within themselves, but somehow they knew differently. And it was important that they be able to pass that down to those children that they came in contact with. We have been the first out of the gate many times as women to imagine, to create, to innovate, to see the possibilities within the impossible. And there's a scripture that I hold on to dearly that says, with God, all things are possible. And I believe that to be true. So we're trained to see the possibilities within the impossible and to know that using our gifts in the services of others is a reward in itself. And so knowing that it's not about us, the work that we do is not about me. The work that I'm supporting other people in doing is not about them. It's about what we're building for those who are coming behind us. So as women, we have reimagined and we've even extended time to embrace the responsibilities of leading and educating simultaneously, while also balancing the commitment to family and friends and loved ones. And our leadership is, as it is told in Proverbs 31, is known at the gates. And we are indeed valued as virtuous and tenacious leaders. And I commend you for what you're doing and also remind you to continue to tell yourself the stories of victories, especially if nobody else is echoing them, to remember them. So 2020 requires that we continue our concerted effort as women in community. Black women want the same thing for our children as non-Black women, a quality education that leads towards satisfaction, interdependence, and fulfillment of purpose. We know and have known that the state of education in Nova Scotia for many African Nova Scotian students and staff is a racialized experience in comparison to non-Black peers and non-Black staff. This difference creates barriers within educational settings that fail to nurture and inspire opportunities for success and achievement. In effect, we know it's racism and racist climates produce student and parental disengagement, lowered performance, and risk to health and well-being. This isn't new knowledge. We know this to be true. It has been documented, but it's important that it's reiterated through this conversation as we're talking about the state of education. The bigger question that I believe the women who came before me compelled me to ask are, what are the changes that I as a Black woman, that we say as Black women are necessary to correct and to make in our system? Secondly, who needs to know this information? What processes are we proposing will be necessary to institute these changes And then as this work is being taken up, because it is the expectation that when we bring forward this information, that it be enacted upon and not just listened and heard, how do we want to be informed? How do we want the system to inform us of what is being done and whether or not the actions that are taken are impactful? Our answers to these questions are imperative to the notion of system change, because we need to be able to carve out very specifically what it is that we want to see. And one of the critiques of critical theorists I was reminded of so many times is that we can identify the issues, but we need to be able to move it forward to the specific asks that we are making of our system, and being able to delineate that in measurable ways. What is it that we mean by this change? As the history of educational excellence within our province declares, African Nova Scotian women have always fashioned, shaped, and directed educational conversations and actions. This is true. We are here June 25th, 2020, because of women who gathered, like women at the well. Women who gathered, women who seen, women who imagine, women who believe, women of action, women of purpose, women who could see the impossible through the possibilities that existed and even beyond. So I want to offer the following things for consideration, because I believe I am in good hands. The first thing that I want to ask us, and I want to ask of you, is what is in your hand? And by that I mean recognizing the power and the degrees of influence and privilege that you have presently. And I believe you already know that, because you're doing that now. Through who you are and what you've come to believe, you have created this platform. You realize there are things that could be done to advance the cause of education for a Black student, to create the spaces for different voices and different information to be heard. And so that is precisely what I'm saying we need to continue to do as Black women. What is in your hand? I'm reminded of the story of Moses in the Bible, and he was making excuses around, I can't do this, this is bigger than me, how am I going to do this? And the only thing God asked him was, what's in your hand? Because whatever we have been equipped for, we know we're going to be prepared to carry that out. And we may not necessarily know all that's what's in our hand, but you have to come to believe that whatever you need, you will receive. And the hardest part is to begin to act. And I can only imagine the conversations that you must have had to bring us to this point where we now have this platform to begin to talk and share. The meetings, the conversations, the emails. You utilize what was in your hand to create this new space. So that question of asking is so crucial, and reminding us that the impossible begins with using what it is that we've come to know and believe and trust in. What are the regular things in our everyday life that we can use to make the differences in the educational system? And when we start small like that, I've learned that the greatness will take care of itself. That people will come alongside you of like-minded, and that collaboration will begin. But you have to start with the vision that you have within you. And sometimes it means you're starting by yourself when nobody else can see it. But use what is in your hand, because it will create that difference and make that difference in the system. So what are you equipped to do? And I love this question. What else is inside you as women? We may know ourselves through our positions, we may know ourselves through family, we may know ourselves through community, but we don't know the entirety of what we have been gifted with and birthed to do in its fullness. And those gifts are essential to the conversation of educational change for Black learners. So what else is inside you? How will you use what you have to build? And how will you be involved in the proposed changes? The next point of consideration that I want to share is around telling ourselves and our children the truth. So in light of what we know, the state of education to be within our province, I'm reminded of the stories that were told to me as a child. And yes, I saw family members and the men and the women gather and discuss difficult topics, but one of the things they did not forget to do was to tell us their stories of truth, who we were as children, who the individuals in the communities were to them. Educational changes that we desire to see require us to carve out new stories, even beyond the stories that we have been telling ourselves, and truthful stories about our connections to education. What is it we must do? What will the priorities be? Who can be involved? Is there space within everyone within community to contribute? It also means telling our children the truth about our values, our narratives, our history, and not only the oppression that they are experiencing. Because if we only provide students with the stories of oppression without also offering them the hope and the possibility that comes from the strength of our heritage, then we laden them with a burden that is often too hard to carry. I'm not a parent, but I am an aunt. And when my nieces come to sleep over, it's important that I pour into them as my aunts poured into me, the stories of their worth, their value, the truth, to counter those negative stories that they may have heard and come in contact with. And I'm not dismissing the history of the enslavement area or the oppression. On the contrary, I'm recognizing that. But what I'm saying is our truth did not begin with those errors. Those are other people's stories of us. So what are the stories we need to tell our children going forward? The third consideration that I remember hearing is about being able to give a swift answer when asked. So if I'm willing to bring forward all of these concerns and difficulties and changes, I must be also willing to be part of that systemic change. So like you, as you have all spoken about education in your own unique ways using the platforms, you also decided to roll up your sleeves and to create this new space for other people to come. The critical changes we desire definitely involve systemic changes and also the expectations around social responsibilities of everyone who is involved in education. It is not the responsibility of Black people to change the system. They require us to speak and to act, and after we have identified what is necessary, being involved in the conversation and also the messiness, the complexity of rolling up our sleeves kind of work that moves ideas through to implementation. So when I was told to always be ready to make sure you have an answer, that for me spoke about the actual actions that I have to be prepared to undertake. And many of the actions that we are going to be asked to do are outside of the realm that we have envisioned. Because remember, as women, we have relied on the wisdom and the collectivity and the collaboration of other people. So when newness is brought to us, being able to give a swift answer, for me, ask the question, am I willing to run alongside other people who may even be ahead of me? Or do I need to be at the front? Can I be a running mate to somebody else and roll up my sleeves and dig in so that they can get to the finish line ahead of me? That's shared accountability. I want to also briefly talk about speaking truth through and to power. And those are differences that I see. So what are the things that we need to speak about, talk about, share, and become involved in? Absolutely. But using our power and our privilege, and we all have it, to outline the injustices and to clearly articulate how the inequities occur, are manifested, impact our learners, as well as propose solutions that we are willing to move forward in conjunction with others. So we have the power. Are we using our power, and how are we utilizing that? My fifth point is also anchored from a Christ-centered perspective, and it's around opening your eyes to realize there are more with us than against us. The global protests, the marches, the voices, spaces, and I also like places which people are now occupying or now are being created beside us is new. This civil unrest certainly just demonstrative that there are people who do not look like us that are for us now and working on behalf. Can we embrace that now? We must acknowledge, honor, and truly value the authenticity of their commitment. So if they weren't walking beside us yesterday, are we willing to recognize and acknowledge that they are joining us today? My last consideration around the state of education within Nova Scotia also is about us, because I think our community strengthened us so that we could strengthen other people. And this one for me is deeply held because it requires that we give ourselves self-care and we take the time to recognize the trauma that each of us have experienced within the educational system, working in education, alongside education, working in community for education, the historical trauma, the complex trauma that comes from racism, and the ways in which we are impacted. Because the research is clear that because of who we are and the racialized society in which we're in, we will be impacted by racism. There are health and social impacts on our lives as Black citizens, and the research speaks to the social determinants of health and the decreased life expectancy for Black learners, Black adults, Black individuals in our society. So the messages we tell ourselves will be crucial as we move forward. We are in a landscape that we know is satisfied with the status quo. That the status quo has worked quite well for some people and some students and some people's children, but it has not worked well for all of our Black students and African Nova Scotian students. We know the data exists with respect to this proportionality. We have undertaken research. There's been research and documents that have been gathered for decades. We have this information. And going forward in 2020, we know that the status quo is and has no longer and has ever been what we as African people have expected of education in this province. The work that we undertake will involve the systemic barriers, the individual racism, addressing, identifying, tackling it, speaking the truth in the positions that we're in to create better educational options and learning experiences for Black learners. Thank you.
So at this time, thank you, Dr. Marlene Ruck. You present us with lots of thoughts and information for to consider. So at this time, I'll just see if there's anyone who have any questions that they would like to pose to you for what you've said, and actions that are possibilities to move forward. You can also, if you don't want to speak, you can also put some of your questions in the chat, and we'll keep track of that as well, Marlene, to give to you. But for those who want to ask the question directly, just unmute yourself, and that way you can pose that question, and Marcia will help facilitate on that end as well.
And please just call me Marlene. Thank you.
Darlene, there's one question they have. Are IPP programs more harmful than beneficial for our Black students? The system seems to push our Black kids towards IPPs.
So IPPs, just around the individual program plans, we know they're originally designed for students that have identified needs and that are not able to achieve the regular curriculum outcomes as prescribed. There was a review that was done in 2016 that spoke to the disproportionality that exists around individual program plans for Black students. And so that report is public. It also spoke to the lack of documentation that existed around individual program plans. And so the evidence is clear that that is not how we should be using individual program plans. If there is something that has been diagnosed and there is a reason for an individual program plan, that a student requires it. But when individual program plans are developed for students, we're essentially saying that there is something special, something cognitively or physically wrong or different rather for that child's not able to achieve the outcomes. And I've often wondered that if a child begins in primary and there's no cognitive delays, there's no developmental issues that exist, there's no trauma that happens to a child, then the concern for me is around why is it now that individual program plans become important? And how is it that we're moving in that direction when there's no evidence to suggest the need for that to continue? So that is an area that is highly problematic, absolutely. If an individual program plan is developed for a child because there is a need and it meets that need, then it's used for the right purpose. Just gonna grab.
Another question they had, Marlene. How can we trust a system which has historically marginalized us to now embrace us? What concrete step can school boards take right now to reduce any anti-Black racism in the curriculum and classrooms?
Can you repeat the first part about I heard the racism part in our system?
Yeah, it says, how can we trust a system which has historically marginalized us to now embrace us? Yeah. What concrete steps can we, school boards, take right now to reduce anti-Black racism in the classroom and the curriculum?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair question to ask. We're talking about issues of trust, and we know that within Nova Scotia, our communities for over 400 years have asked for an equitable education. So we're talking a mistrust that has been well-founded in the system, absolutely, without question. You know, Asa Hilliard just talks about will. If there's a will to create the changes, then that they can happen. So from an anti-racist perspective, there are many things that can be done to create more what we talk about are culturally safe spaces within schools for students. Absolutely.
I have a question. What steps are being taken to ensure Black perspectives and voices are being included with developing curricula?
So I can certainly speak to some of that. So what broadly, because, sorry, just waiting. I can certainly speak to that broadly. So we know within Nova Scotia that there have been a couple of things that have been happening. So with respect to the inclusive education, the last rollout, there were also supports, the increase in number of African Nova Scotian staff. And then also within the province, there was the creation of the African Nova Scotian branch and the realignment of all of the supports that are designated to support African Nova Scotian students in the province. So there are some key actions that sort of align our system to be better informed by first voice accounts, and also to be better positioned to bring forward those voices and those concerns and the necessary actions and changes that need to happen in our system.
Another question, the wrong right passing. I work with several Black youth who are in the Nova Scotia public sector system, school system, grants of 2020. They informed me that there was not a single ounce of Afrocentric history / Afrocentric education in general. Some of these youth are in the international graduation program. Can you speak to the current requirements for exposure to Afrocentric individualized education opportunities?
So I think what the question is asking is,
Long question.
where does African Nova Scotian history show up within the curriculum, essentially?
Hi, sorry, that was my question.
Yeah.
I can just speak to that very briefly. Yeah, so my question is, what are the current requirements, if any, for like a minimum level of exposure to Afrocentric history in the current curriculum?
Yeah, I don't think there's like a minimum level. So what we do know now is, as a result of, there's a curriculum renewal process that's going on, and that there is the direction to embed African Nova Scotian history as the curriculum is being renewed. So as that's certainly something that's happening. Some of the sort of former actions that were taken in the past, we know there is the current 2 courses that exist at the high school level, the ACS 11, the African Heritage Literature 12 courses that exist. But through the curriculum renewal process, it's not just the opportunity, but I think the intentionality around embedding authentic African Nova Scotian history that reflects the experiences of youth going forward. So that's our aim, and that's, oh, you're welcome. That's the intention of within EEC and our branch in particular, and as we work across the various programs, departments.
I have a question. As a white woman teaching, what can I do to help to support our Black students? You talked about how that it was really important to not only tell stories of oppression, and it seems to me like all of the stories that we have are stories like that. And I just want to know, where can I start? Like, what can I do to be better, to you know, because I hear a lot of people saying, like, how can we trust? And you know, I just don't know what to do, where to get started.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. The first thing I would say is you've already started by asking the question, what can you do? And that is the will. The second thing you can do is to seek out educational opportunities. We have within the community a number of historical heritage sites, museums, cultural centers that are available that will provide access to materials. As a parent, being able to visit African Nova Scotian communities to get us to truly have a sense of a firsthand account that allows you to immerse yourself in the community and not through the lens of the media. Taking steps to also read up on the history of African Nova Scotians within the province, understanding as a white person what privilege you carry, white privilege in particular, talking to your children about race and racism at an appropriate level that they would begin to understand, so that you can teach your children to love versus hate. We know children have to be taught to hate. Oh, was there another question?
Yes, there's many.
Okay, so I think educating yourself, seeking out what are those cultural icons and places in community, begin reading, start questioning yourself, finding literature that talks about privilege, that talks about racism. Now we're quite fortunate. You can turn on your computer, go on YouTube, and you would find a variety of resources and webinars that are also talking and discussing that. I don't know if you work within the educational system as well, but also being willing to listen and learn from colleagues in your system, connecting and choosing to be an ally alongside them as you seek to understand, not feeling that you have to resolve the issues of all of the historical past, but recognizing, like I said, what's in your hand now to do? What is the power that you can do to be able to take up your place in creating some of the differences in the educational system?
Marlene, do you mind, can I make one suggestion to Michelle? I think one of the ways to grow, I really believe that one of the very genuine and organic ways to grow is to put yourself in uncomfortable situations. So to me, that's where you'll find the most growth. And it will also lend you a sense of empathy towards kind of the uncomfortable situations that we are put in on a daily basis as well. So there's some level of empathy that you'll be able to connect with there as well. So being uncomfortable is really where we grow the most and grow most sincerely.
Thank you, Wendy.
Marlene, can I just, oh, sorry, Michelle. You wanted to follow? Okay. There was a question that was posed on there, Marlene, about the mechanism. What are the mechanisms being used to ensure teachers are changing their teaching practice to reflect the culture responsive pedagogy, to ensure teachers are changing their practices?
So
That's me, Merle.
yeah, I think those are regional conversations, but I think you're right in recognizing that as a province, there was the launch of CRP within the system, absolutely. And the responsibility of individuals who attended those sessions to be able to enact pedagogy in a way that was supportive of all learners, absolutely.
So the question was to add an addition, like who's holding them accountable? That's the question that they're asking.
Yeah, I think that's a definitely, I think that's a great question. Those would be sort of regional sort of decisions, regional levels of accountability, as well as, I guess, in partnership with with the department, but I don't know on an individual level. I guess what I also think about are the teaching standards that are available, and you know, the tools that are in place, and how is that embedded. So as I'm here, you're probably going to be asking some system questions, and you know, what I'll be able to answer, I will. And the other things, I think certainly I'll be able to get back to you around some of the specific sort of system EECD questions or regional center questions.
So Marlene, can you speak to, like, is there an increase of African Nova Scotian students going to post-secondary like now versus 20 years ago versus 10 years ago? And what is the increases? Like, can you give us some positive news on that note?
I can't sort of speak to the increase, or I don't have that data at my fingertips, but we do know that we have seen, in terms of from a departmental perspective, an increase in the number of scholarships and awards that we have distributed throughout the system for students who are going to post-secondary studies.
Another question was, so how does the community trust that the Centers of Education has these checkpoints in place for accountability?
Where was it at?
Just before you start, can someone tell me how to get my my chat? I don't know. I typed something, but it's not going anywhere. Thank you.
Marlene, so they're still talking about accountability, like who, you know, monitors that this is being taken place, you know, in the school system in terms of being accountable.
Those are important questions to ask. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Another question, so can parents hold teachers accountable for what they teach our kids?
So as a So as a parent, you know, the Education Act is clear that parents are a vital part of their children's education. And as a parent, you have the right to request information on how your child is progressing through the system. Absolutely. That parental component is critical to being able to monitor how well your children are doing, and to be able to ask the questions when you feel it's necessary.
Just a comment that's in the chat where it says many teachers need to be re-educated based on her truth and fact-based knowledge. Not sure if that's saying her again. The hard truth.
Right.
You know? Any more questions here?
Yeah, can I just follow up with one, Marsha? Also, Marlene, you can, there was a question in the chat about, has there been any conversation about an Afrocentric school, like they have French schools? So that's a question that was posed as well. There's quite a few comments that are in there, and I know Marsha's trying to keep up with all of them.
They're flowing by really quickly. I can really keep up with them.
So is there a discussion of having Afrocentric school like we have the French school? And then there was a question about, is there a plan to have African Nova Scotian support workers in each school?
Mm-hmm. So let me take both of them. I think the original intention, because you know those positions that came out of the Black report, was so that every child would have that mentor, an individual who would be able to support and advise and guide a student while they're in the public education system. That is certainly what we are working towards. as a department, as a branch. And with respect to the Afrocentricity, what I can share, I guess at this point, and you may be aware because it's public knowledge, is the Afrocentric program, that Karen has led out of Auburn High School, and support towards that program and any initiatives like that, I think, are important. And we know that the environment and the culture and the sense of hope and the possibility, almost similar to the things that I shared earlier, the ways in which the students were poured into, made a difference in terms of their achievement and their ability to access even advanced courses. So the fruit of that approach, I think, is quite evident without question, whether or not you look at it through a school improvement lens, an Afrocentric lens. When we care and love and guide and support Black learners and inspire them, they will achieve. So we know that that approach works, and we want all of our kids to be able to experience that in the system. Yeah.
Oh, I can't see Irvin. They said Irvin has his hand up, but I couldn't see it.
Go ahead, Irvin. You can.
Oh.
Do you have a question, Irvin?
Thanks, Karen. I wanted to respond to Michelle's question about what she could do as a white teacher and director at the community YMCA. I have hundreds of African Nova Scotian students who come into my facility to play basketball and play different sports. I have yet to see one of their white teachers come down and just to observe them, just to support them. And my point was, really, you need to know where these kids are coming from, what their home situation is, what their community situation is. It gives you a deep appreciation for the challenges that they face when they walk in that classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good point.
Wow.
Marlene, there's a question here about how do we start? Is my thing on? Oh, okay, sorry.
No, yep, I'm here.
I didn't know if you could hear me, sorry.
That's okay. No, I was trying to go through some of the chats and pick up some of the conversations there.
Okay, one of the question was, one question is about if we could address about the rural areas, because we haven't talked a little bit about that. But another question, how do we start changing the narrative of the achievement gap? Terming it this way implies that the problem is with our Black students. The problem isn't our students. The real problem is the attitude of teachers. So I would like to see this language change. Is this a possibility?
Yeah, I think I think the achievement gap is talked about many ways. So how I talk about it personally is in terms of an opportunity gap. So you're right in suggesting that the disparities that exist, the disproportionality that exists, has nothing to do with the cognitive functioning of Black children. But it has a lot to do with their access to learning and opportunities to learn in safe ways. So there are a variety of terms that are out there. Sometimes it's the attitude, absolutely. I guess I try to focus more on the actions, because I realize we cannot change anyone's belief systems and we cannot change anybody's attitude, but what we can change is the expectations and the behaviors and the actions. And that for me is more important. So what are the expectations that we need to have of teachers who are teaching Black children? And what are the opportunities that our students need to have within the public education system that we know will inspire learning and not just support learning? I guess that's the difference for me. Oh, and the rural school, we know definitely that the experiences of Black students living in the rural areas are certainly different, without question. We don't know as of yet what that qualitative difference looks like within the educational system, but very interested in figuring that out and finding out more around how do we support students. And I guess certainly we've heard the stories, but what will be the qualitative differences that will make a difference for Black students? And we know they're going to be different. Sometimes it's transportation issues. Other times it's, it really depends on the areas, but we need to find out more.
There's a question here.
There's another question, yeah. Are you getting the last one?
Can you get that one, Masha?
Yeah, there's a question, because as we know, we have an aging African Nova Scotia teacher population. What steps are the department doing to work with recruitment to ensure our African Nova Scotia students will see teachers that look like them?
Yeah, we know I guess at this point, just in terms of the enrollments in teacher education programs overall, that students are not enrolling in bachelor education programs as they have done in the past. I remember when I was doing my BED many years ago, it was quite a competition to be able to be enrolled in those programs. And a number of years ago, I remember driving by the Bedford Highway, and they were advertising that there were spaces still open in the BED program. So we need to get the students into the system, into the bachelor's program. We need to be able to graduate them through our system first to be able to get them into this post-secondary studies, and then support them while they're going through their practicum and with mentors while they're working within their systems. So all of those things would need to be considered. Those are the things that come to mind from our perspective. We still provide, when I say we, so thinking from that department hat, the teacher education awards still exist, but it's really around generating not just the interest, but also the trust and the trust that when students enter those programs that they'll also have a job. And not just the recruitment of the students, but also the work around how do we retain them and sustain the teaching complement when they're involved in the regions or within our province. So
I missed some questions. You can actually ask the questions directly to Marlene, okay? Because some of them are passing by and I'm missing out on them. So there's a few that said they asked your questions twice. Go ahead and ask Marlene. Don't be shy.
Just Marsha.
Because I can't seem to.
Hello? Can everybody hear me?
We can. Go ask your question.
You can. This is Uncle Sizwe.
good evening, how are you?
I'm fine.
I am very well. I want to first start by thanking Dr. Marlene, and I emphasize the word doctor. We're talking about education, and I happen to know that the gaining of a doctorate in the type of educational system that we have, the gaining of a doctorate by a Black learner is not an easy task. So I am going to recognize your achievement by calling you Dr. Marlene. I also hesitate in this comment I'm about to make because I've been out of the loop for quite many years, and it might not be relevant, but I will make it nonetheless. And that is, it had always been my observation that in spite of the barriers and the difficulties in the system for Black learners, certain families seem consistently over the years tend to meet better success. Certain Black families tend to meet with better success than others, and certain Black communities, for example, Inglewood, consistently performed higher than the average community. Now, has that been investigated to find out what those communities that are succeeding and what those families that are succeeding, what they're doing right, and how the rest of us can learn from it? Because we're talking education, we're talking nurturing, education being just one part of it. And that whole business of nurturing an individual to adult, from baby really to the point where they're able to go and earn a living and function in the society, is the work of the village. It takes a village. The other thing I would say is that, yes, it takes a village, but what is the village? What's the size of the village, and how is the village conceptualized? As I said, I've been out of the loop, and if I'm out in left field, then I apologize. But those are my comments.
Do you want to answer, Marlene?
Okay.
Or comment?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you. So appreciate your comments, and it's nice to hear your voice again. You are correct that there is anecdotal information that talks about specific communities consistently producing learners who are able to achieve throughout the system, absolutely. And there are a variety of communities to do that. You talked about, you know, the role of the village and how large the village is, and what that makes me think of, you know, in health and mental health, we talk about protective factors for students. And so what are the protective factors that families are able to build around their children to be able to guide and help assure that they are going to be successful regardless of the system that they're in? And so we know that those protective factors certainly make a difference. Some of the things that research speaks to is having one adult in your corner who is going to be there, that youth know they can depend on consistently. And that makes a difference in terms of the ability of the students to be resilient, but also the ability of the students to be able to plan forward and successfully move forward. So you're not correct in highlighting the significance of the village to the success of learners. Absolutely. And I guess,
So,
you know, that was one of my, oh, sorry.
There was another question here, but then I'm going to, somebody got their hand raised, which is 028801. I don't know who that is. But before you go to her, that person or him, I'm not sure if it's a male or female. There's just a couple questions here that I wanted to follow up. One is called, how can we hold universities that produce teachers in BED programs accountable for the ways in which they recruit students for these programs and properly prepare them to teach in a culturally responsive manner? And then I'll get to 028801 to speak after that question.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful question to ask, because we know educational institutions, it doesn't matter if they're sort of public school level or post-secondary institutions, is that the original intentions of those institutions were quite elitist, and so they weren't designed for all students. And so there is a need to be quite deliberate in the ways in which they are, the ways in which we expect that they serve and care for students who are entering their portals of learning. And I've seen a number of things happen, not just here in Nova Scotia, but also elsewhere, around having, sorry, you're gonna hear there's children in the background. A number of things that have worked really well in terms of having African Nova Scotian staff on site within those institutions that are designated to support the learners as they are moving through the system as well, and having those safe spaces for the learners while they're at the post-secondary institutions. From a credentialing perspective, I think that's another area that would have to be examined to make sure, do we have what we need in order to hold that accountability that you're speaking about. So an examination of what is in place, is it working, and for whom is it working for?
Absolutely. 028801. There's somebody got their hand up. They're supposed to speak next. Okay. Are you going to speak, whoever you are? If not, I'll keep going.
I think it's.
Maybe it's in there. Can we all?
Get in.
Oh, are you going? Who are you? Go ahead. Sorry.
I thought I was getting in. Not sure.
Is that you, Melinda?
Yeah, it's me.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead. Say it.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I know what it's like. So thank you very much. Even for me, I mean, still trying to figure this out, trying to talk too loud and all this kind of stuff, right? So, hello, everybody. Very much.
Good evening.
Hi, Marlene. It's so nice to see you.
It's nice to hear your voice again.
When it comes to talking about education and our kids, our teachers, you know, that's where my passion lies. That's what. When it comes to education and spirituality and plight of our people in Nova Scotia, in Canada, it pains my heart that we were back here years ago, many, many years ago. Our parents and our grandparents and our great-grandparents were back here. And now here we are, and here we are again, folks, having this conversation. It's a must, and I appreciate it. I'm glad that we did this. We have to keep in touch with one another. You know, even though we're not in those schools, we know what's going on with us. We know especially the concern that we have for our kids, especially. So first of all, Marlene, thank you for bringing that up about, you know, Black women in education. That made me really stop and think and appreciate. I want to tell you a little story, and that is, I want to tell you that I know that you are Marlene to us, but respectfully, you will be Dr. Ruck. I had to say that. I wanted to say that. Always at the school board, I make a point of saying, Ruck, Dr. Ruck, Dr. Ruck. You were the only person at that school board that had that earned doctorate. I wanted to make a point of letting them know that I was aware of that and very proud of that. We all should be, and we were indeed. I look at what's happening over the years with the IPPs and the mental health of children, the school, the education, the miseducation, the systemic racism, what's happening with our teachers, our classroom performances, all of these things, these suspensions, things like this. It pains our hearts And what I'm getting ready to say is that we need to go back. I know we are, but let's look at what does the report say? What does the Black report tell us? That the systemic exclusion, the miseducation, and oftentimes misplacement of African Nova Scotians children have been suffered at the hands of professional administrators, teachers, and other educational institutions. Should this report be shelved or the recommendations compromised? So we need to ask ourselves, has it been shelved? Has it been put on compromise, in a compromising position? Sure, we have a lot of things, and I'm very proud of the Black report. You know, I worked on that, and many of us in this conference call tonight have. But we also have to recognize that the report itself is been left out, left behind. We're missing some things that we had one time, and gradually we've let a government, a systemic racist institution start ripping a bit away at a time, a bit away. We don't have some of the things that we used to have. Marsha, Karen, all of us, you understand where I'm coming from. We need to go back and get some of those things. And if it's compromised, then we have to look at the legal recourse under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom, the Constitution Act of 1982 and the Nova Scotia Act. We need to look at that. We need to look at Brown versus the Board of Education and a whole lot of other reports as well. I'm going fast because I know other people want to speak, but we need to hold on to.
I have a question, Ron, actually, on that question. Here it is. When you say to ourselves and our children the truth, how does one go about this when we fear what our truth is and are often in denial? We are often extremely negative, women towards women, more often than not.
Can't hear you. You're breaking up.
It's breaking up?
Yeah.
Right, we can't hear you. You're sounding fuzzy.
Turn your video off. Turn your video off and you
read the question.
Hear better. Yeah.
So I'll start again. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go try now, Marsh.
Okay. It says, when you say to ourselves, when you say to tell ourselves and our children the truth, how does one go about this when we fear what our truth is and are often in denial? We are often extremely negative, women towards women more often than not, towards one another. When you say we do, but are we really uplifting, or are we strategically trying to ensure woman next to me fails? I can't make it what they're saying. Do you see this or witness this attitude, and how do you prevail as positive within it?
Oh, take my mute off. Thank you for the question. So I hear it as, so part of the truth telling is around recognizing that we don't always get it right and that we're not always kind to each other. And that how do we in the community begin to turn that around initially with ourselves before we move forward, and that it will make it difficult moving forward if we're not moving forward as a collective. So I hear what you're saying around that truth telling, and I think that definitely is another area that we would need to tell ourselves the truth around, and to, as my mom would say, let's be honest. are we practicing the things that we are holding other people accountable for? And that is a really important question to ask. You know, one of the things I asked or I said, you know, is there space for everyone within the community to contribute? And the comment was around women in particular, but, you know, can everybody be a part? And how do we be kind to people, like you're asking? Can we just be kind? Is kindness linked to us agreeing or having the same opinion or being in the same sort of group or companionship? So that definitely, absolutely would be part of the truth telling, and beginning with ourselves. Where are we honestly at? And I think from a wellness perspective, that is an area that we need to spend some time, because I talked about the trauma, the traumatic effects, either from racism, and sometimes it's just from being in places and spaces where we are. But if we don't spend time there ourselves and be comfortable with asking the questions of ourselves and how we deal with others, I think we will not, the bond that we create or the village that we create will not be as strong as it needs to be. So I really appreciate that question that was asked, and I think it needs to be asked, absolutely. So how do we build up each other? How do we create that space to care for each other, whether or not we're in agreement with it? Absolutely.
And Marlene, there was, thank you for that and for that whole piece on wellness. If Jackie is there, because she said she had her hand up and I can't see the question, I was trying to go up.
That was the question, Karen.
Was that the question?
That was it. I found it, went through it.
Okay, all right.
And I'd like to thank Melinda Day for her points. She was right on point. Just have to get the hand up there. Sorry.
So is there any other question? We've got about 4 minutes left.
I have a question.
Can I say thank you? Yes, you paid it. I really love it. Thank you both, Karen and Marcia and Marlene.
I don't know where
no problem.
I don't know where the hand raising button is, but I have a question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Do you believe that educational change is possible given the long-standing systemic barriers that enable Black learners to continue to be marginalized? Or is a radical paradigm shift to demand change given our current climate required? Because as Ms. Day referred to the Black Report, is incremental change that has been historical in education, you know, what we need or what we should continue to work towards, or do we need to disrupt? And by we, I mean collectively as a community, the system. And if so, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the Black Report contained all of that.
Yes.
You know, there were specifics. There was attention to the incremental. There was attention to community. There was attention to the educational system, the systemic barriers. There was attention to parents. So I think it entails all of that. What we believe this system what we believe education needs to be for our children is not going to come through just one avenue. So I think I would definitely agree that the approach we take needs to be multifaceted. It cannot just be one thing, one approach.
Can I speak to that first, Martin? Hey, Martin.
There's somebody, I think there's somebody else too when you're done.
Hi, Wendy.
Wendy, there's somebody too after you. So whoever's after Wendy, can you just chime in, please?
So the question that I've asked myself many times is the system actually broken? My conclusion to that question is that actually I think it's working quite well. I think it's a well-oiled machine. If it was broken, we still wouldn't be hanging on to it. And when I say that, what I mean, it works for the few and not everyone. So is this the system that we want to fix, or do we need a whole different system? This system is not working. So if you look at the current state of education and the structure, you will see that it's a very hierarchical. It's from the top down. And at the bottom of the pyramid, you'll see the people on the ground who are most accountable. We are the most accountable. And as you go further up the ladder, and you can even look at it as a corporate ladder, it's the way it's scaffolded or structured. As you go further up the ladder, you will see there's less accountability. And so I think we need a different structure that isn't hierarchical, that's more collaborative, and that works better with the way that we actually work as a culture, as people of African descent. So I've been saying this for years. I don't think the system is broken at all. I think it is working for the few, and I think they're good the way it's working. What we need to do is we need to dismantle that system and become part of the structure, or flip the system upside down. And I think, Robin, you were the first one to bring that to my attention. Robin Jensen, we had worked at Dartmouth South together, and you had talked about maybe the structure needs to be flipped upside down so that, you know, the community, the schools, the parents are at the top, and that people in programming and finance and all these other places, that they're actually accountable to us, the people doing the work on the front line.
Thank you, Wendy. There was one other person. Go ahead.
Yeah, how you doing? It's Ken Phelps. Listen, I want to go back to Uncle Swayze's question, actually, just to support an Afrocentric modeling, which I know that is the historical significance of the Inglewood community. When you have love and you have family and you have culture and you come from a segregated environment, wholly appreciative of the values that were brought to that community in Inglewood, there's no question with the Jacksons, the Cromwells, the Middletons, all those fantastic people who came out of that community. Their teacher, Edith Cromwell, went through that entire education system with them. So not only did she work in the segregated school system, she followed them through the school system. So as a person of African ancestry, bringing an Afrocentric model before it was Afrocentric and before we used the Pan-African system, teaching them the love and appreciation they had, that's when family and community worked together. That's when mom and dad and all the parents got together. They raised the money, they built the school, they did all those things. And that's why you have that ultimate success. But not unlike Hammond's Plains, not unlike Whitney Pier, not unlike Amherst, not unlike some of the other Black communities in Truro or other places around the province, Weymouth Falls. If you look at, Danvers, Hassets, and you got it, Martin. So if you think about the segregated system, that actually incorporated the values that we're looking at a system to do today. And I agree with Wendy wholeheartedly that the system, I don't know if it has to be turned up, so it's the only system we have. But what we have to do with that system, we need to take control of it like the Acadians did, like the Mi'kmaq did, like the Greeks did, like every single other ethnic group in Nova Scotia, and get our own situation together. We talk about it all the time, and then we go away and there's no action. So action speaks louder than words. And I think we're blessed to have Dr. Marlene speak today because, she got it going on. And I know she don't like me calling her doctor either, but she is what she is. And I'm very proud of all the things that we have done as a people. So that, to me, is about Inglewood and other Black communities coming out of a segregated era with no background and no grounding in education, only having a grade 2 and 3 education and still being productive to this day, holding our children on their shoulders. We need to go back to that Afrocentric modeling.
I'm not sure if there is anybody else because I can't see the hands. Marcia, can you let me know?
I'm like Melinda Day. I'm trying to figure this out myself, this technology.
Okay.
Can I just piggyback for a second, Karen? I'll only take a couple minutes here, just to piggyback on what was just said. Sylvia Hamilton's Little Black Schoolhouse. One of the themes that came out of that for me was that no one ever complained about the state of education when schools were segregated. What people wanted is they wanted options, and obviously that wasn't happening for them. But when schools were segregated, I don't know if people realize this or not, but in the South, the decade following the 1954 Brown versus the Board of Education, close to 90,000 Black teachers were dismissed from the South through the evaluation process. So when we had
Yeah,
Black
it's the same
teachers,
thing happening in Canada.
I would imagine, yeah, the same thing. I'm sure, and it still does. It still does. And so imagine marrying a group of teachers that look like the students, who are culturally very similar, and with the resources that we acquired after the Brown versus the Board, after desegregation, what we got is we lost that commitment from our teachers, and we went to be taught by virtually strangers, and that didn't have that community connection, but we had the resources. So imagine if we had the commitment from the community as well as the resources. If we could marry those two things, we'd be in business.
So that's a good segue to actually to come to the end, which is just trying to keep on track here. So thank you for everyone who participated tonight. The conversation is not over. We're just starting this conversation. We have another one next Tuesday, 6 to 7:30. We've just starting it, but the conversation has already started actually amongst each other. I want to just take this opportunity to thank Marlene Ruck, Dr. Marlene Ruck Simmonds, for coming in here and lending some of her wisdom and knowledge. And also she talked about a very important point about the spirituality piece, which is embedded within who we are of people of African descent. And so that's very important in terms of what makes us. And so thank you, Marlene, for allowing us to talk about our spirituality, but also the role of women and what role we play in terms of this educational landscape, if you want to call it that, for what we need to do in terms of the work that is ongoing. Thank you for your knowledge and also for speaking your truth and providing your narrative. And thank you to the Nova Scotia Black Women's Alliance, as well as the Nova Scotia Men's Health League for providing this Zoom meeting and these conversations that are held on a regular basis. So continue to look forward for our upcoming events that are happening in regards to the conversations about education, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Stay well, and we'll talk to you soon. Good night, all. Thank you.